Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
President Trump and Republicans unleash a blistering attack on Joe Biden and the Democrats. So, what difference will it make? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. The Republican Party, now fully the party of Donald Trump, unveils everyday heroes, inspirational stories of triumph through despair, a full-throated defense of the American way of life, a vigorous defense of Trump's record, and no-holds-barred attacks on Biden and the Democrats at their national convention. We'll analyze what they said and how it is likely to affect the campaign that gets underway in earnest right about now. We'll examine the question of which candidate represents the greater risk to the American people. And LibertyNation.com editor-in-chief Lisa K. Donner jumps on board to drill down on presidential polls famously wrong 4 years ago and the matter of whether we can trust them this time. So the Democrats and Republicans have now completed their primetime hours on stage, and the presidential campaign is off and running with just 2 months before Americans go to the polls. Which party gained and which lost at the end of this 2-week stretch of conventions, or was it a push? Joining us to consider the state of the race as we head up to Labor Day is our old friend, LibertyNation.com political columnist Joe Schaeffer, who has provided superb coverage of every night of both conventions. Welcome back, Joe.
Oh, thank you, Tim. It's good to be here.
Well, good to have you as always. So, Joe, did Republicans move the needle this week? And if so, was it more based on Trump's defense of his own record or his and his party's portrayal of Biden and the Democrats as truly dangerous to the safety and security of Americans?
You know what I think a lot of it was Trump's supporters were just waiting for a party. And it was too bad in that regard that it was virtual, because if it was live, like normal, I think it would have been really rollicking. We have a controlled media in this country. They've been pushing this narrative that the Democrats are on the cusp of some forward progress revolution. And we've all had to swallow it for so long in the midst of this pandemic. I think the grassroots people who supported Trump, they couldn't wait to have a moment where we can say, let's talk about Donald Trump, let's boost him up. So I think that happened this week, and I think it's going to give him a significant boost. And, Joe Biden, you and I have both said we never believed that these polls saying he was in the lead were true. It'll be interesting to see how he holds on, given that I think Trump is going to have a surge.
So after not saying a single word about the riots overwhelming more than 24 cities at their own convention, Democrats finally permitted Biden to go out this week to decry the burning down of Kenosha, Wisconsin. Was this a course correction that will save Biden from his previous silence about this insurrection? Or is it too little too late to reverse the image of a candidate and party which has done and said almost nothing about some of our greatest cities being overrun by criminals?
Yeah, and he didn't even do a good job answering the question. He sounded weak. It sounded like he was at one of the primary debates where they were also just subservient to the progressive left. He actually said it's right-wingers and white supremacists causing this violence. Anybody who is paying the least bit of attention knows that that's not true. But he says it anyway because I think, he is being pressured by this progressive left. And he just comes out and says this stuff. It makes him look weak. He doesn't seem to realize it. If he had made some kind of, it didn't even have to be too forceful, just some kind of lip service to law and order. And yes, we do respect the police. It would have gone so much further, but he couldn't help injecting the identity politics, it's the right wingers doing this. It's not going to help him at all.
Well, now you said the expression respect the police. Now, it's one thing to decry open insurrection, the burning down, looting, rioting, the lives ruined, The people murdered, more than 30 of them now in this urban violence. But it's another thing to go beyond that as a Democrat and say, we support the police. Do you think Joe Biden will ever be compelled to say that? Is there any circumstance in which he must?
I don't think so, based on the fact that his self-appointed running mate was on, what was she on, the Colbert Show, and she promised people that these protests aren't going to stop. They're going to continue. They're going to make all of us uncomfortable. It almost sounded, I know she didn't quite mean it that way, but it almost sounded like she was threatening every American citizen in this country. This is how off they are. This is how off the reservation. They're not in control of their own narrative. They're undisciplined. It's crazy how much the progressive left is running this show. And we have to ask, why did you pick Joe Biden then if you were going to do this anyway? He's not, I know you said, the Trojan horse, the smiling guy who's going to get them in. He's not going to be an effective communicator of this message for the next 2 months. And, this thing can really, really go downhill fast for the Democrats. And that was always the risk when you chose Joe Biden to be your nominee.
I think about how quickly Jimmy Carter sunk in 1980 against Ronald Reagan in a race that was very tight until the single debate. And then when Carter went out there, he looked overmatched against Reagan, and Reagan wound up winning a 45-state landslide. And Dukakis in 1988, who came out of his convention with a 17-point lead and lost by 8 points. So that's a 25-point turnaround in a couple of months, maybe 3. So what you're saying is you think that there could be a real nosedive, a plunge for Biden.
And what I find most interesting, maybe the most interesting thing of this whole Republican convention is I get the feeling that they were counting on it. That this was a very confident convention. I wrote some critical things and I stand by them, but they were. I was expecting more red meat, more hitting, more action. It was a very hey, we've got this record. We're the incumbents. We're in the White House. Come get us. And this kind of feeling that Joe Biden can't do it. So Joe Biden is ostensibly way up in the polls. And it was a very, very confident Donald Trump last night giving his speech. And it sounded like a State of the Union address. And he was just ticking off the accomplishments and saying, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. It was the aura of a man who believes that he is going to win. I don't think he's too worried about Joe Biden. And I thought that is a great selling point for Trump, that he came across that way.
Yeah, I think in 2016, he sort of forced his optimism to some degree because he had such a huge hill to climb. I agree that it seems like this time he's got a real inner confidence, having been in the job for 4 years, knowing what it's about, and importantly, Joe, finding out through a long process who he can trust, who he can't in assembling a second-term administration. But there's no question that this election to a large degree, will pivot on the perception of the person of President Trump because no one's excited about Joe Biden. How do you think the perception of Trump, the person, changed, if at all, after 4 days of this convention?
Well, I think it's interesting that he is clearly running as an incumbent. He's not running as an insurgent. He's not that bomb thrower from 2016. He's grown into the job. He's acting very presidential. The Democrats are making a good strategy by being so crazy and chaotic and endorsing violence in the streets. Donald Trump was considered this maniac in 2016 by the media. Donald Trump is the adult in the room now. They've actually done that. The idea was Joe Biden was to return to normalcy. And now Democrats are rioting in the streets. They're making Donald Trump, the guy they want to present as this lunatic. They're making him normalcy to people who aren't devoted to Donald Trump. They're going to see that and they're going to say, yeah, we know who the insane ones are, and it's not the president.
So Joe Biden is putting almost all his eggs in the anti-Trump basket, hoping people will blame Trump for the pandemic and the violence in the streets. But Trump, in turn, has so many possible lines of attack on Biden, as he showed in his acceptance speech, which put Biden on a spit and roasted every inch of him. What aspects would you expect the Trump campaign to particularly focus on or emphasize in the remaining 8 weeks of this campaign?
But I thought there were two in particular. I thought 47 years is never going to grow old. They can keep throwing that out there for the next 2 months, and it is always going to work. This man was in the seat, in the room of political power, of elite political power for 47 years. He goes back to Richard Nixon's first term, right? So he got in there before Watergate. He's been in there that long, hasn't really accomplished a lot, and he is actually running, like you said, an anti-Trump campaign. Nearly 50 years in politics, and he's not bringing any ideas of his own to the table. He's running against something else.
Well, Joe, as always, we appreciate your wit and wisdom, and I know we'll be getting together again a whole lot sooner than later as we approach the crux, the heart of the 2020 presidential campaign. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.